Mr. Director General of the United Nations at Geneva, Excellencies, Ambassadors, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's for me a great pleasure to be with you this evening. First of all, to welcome the students who just started their program of the Master of Advanced Studies in European International Governance. I think it started some days ago. And I think the fact that we have received so many applications for this MAS, this Master of Advanced Studies, show that it was already something which was needed in our society, in our country, and also for the rest of the world. So it's my pleasure, first of all, to extend my very warm welcome to all the students. And also I would like to address my congratulations for the work which has been done by Professor Christine Cadous, who's going to address some words after that. Professor Nicolas Levrat, who worked very hard for preparing this program. But also I would like to extend my thanks to UNITAR also, who collaborate very much to be able to prepare this program of Master's Advanced Studies. For us, this program is quite important for many reasons. First of all, because a few years ago, we have decided at the University of Geneva to create this Global Studies Institute, which now will collect more than 1,000 students who are enrolled in a Bachelor of International Studies, but also different kind of masters. And I think it was a solution and also a decision made by the rectorate, which proved to be very useful, very important for the University of Geneva. Second, I think this master is also quite important for us because we have the willingness to extend the bridge between the University of Geneva and the international organization. It's quite important for us just to be able to be a platform, to be in connection with the international organization, the NGOs also in Geneva, and I think this master also is a translation of that will of the University of Geneva to create this bridge between the University of Geneva and the international organization. And finally, because we have also the decision to create a new executive master, new executive program, and on that respect, I will also try to extend my thanks to the continuing education service of the University of Geneva, who also worked very much to prepare this program. And that also something that we want to extend in the future, to be able to extend also the proposal of this continuing education program for the people living in Geneva, but also people living outside of Geneva, outside of the country. And I think this is also quite important for the University of Geneva. So again, thank you very much for being so numerous tonight to extend our thanks to Mr. Michel Moller, who is here also to present the conference next. And first of all, I would like to then extend the words to the Dean of the Faculty of Law, Professor Christine Chapuis. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Mr. Rector. Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, Mr. Director General, it is my great pleasure to welcome you here tonight. And as so many people are ill, I will be the only one to speak for the University, for the Faculty of Law, for the Global Studies Institute, who's also a partner to this program, and for the Center of European Legal Studies. The director is here, but as her colleague is not here, I will be the only one before her to speak to you. Why is this Master of Advanced Studies important for the Faculty of Law? It is a Master of Advanced Studies not only in law, but in European and international governance, a topic which is quite important at this day and age. And it is important for the Faculty of Law not to think alone, not to think only with the toolboxes of the law. That's why this program is important for us all. It brings together many institutions. It is a joint enterprise, and as such, it is precious. A joint enterprise between the Faculty of Law, with Christine Cadous and Nicolas Levrat, and the Center for European Legal Studies. A joint enterprise also of the Global Studies Institute, and I see many representatives of the Global Studies Institute, not the director who's ill, but many other people from the Global Studies Institute. And then it is a joint enterprise not only in the academia, but also with the Genève Internationale. I know that it does not sound very nice in English, but La Genève Internationale is for us very important. International Geneva, is that something for you? Well, for us it does mean something, and it is important to bring those forces together. We are always much more clever when we are not alone. And that is why we're so happy to have UNITAR on board with us in order to offer you a Master of Advanced Studies which will be useful for you in your professional life. That is why for us, Faculty of Law, this is an important day. It's the first day of the semester. The sun is shining, and we have a new program, which now we are celebrating tonight. And with this, I don't want to speak too long. I just wanted to share with you my enthusiasm for this new program and for the students who come from all over the world. Where are you, students of this program? Raise your hands. Yes. A special welcome to you who have traveled from far away and have tried to find lodging in Geneva, which is not quite something easy, and I hope everything is okay for you so that you can concentrate on your studies, concentrate on this new program. So welcome and have fun, because you can also have fun in Geneva.
Good. Excellencies, Monsieur le Recteur, Madame la Doyenne, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear assistants and dear students, and of course, dear participants to the MEIG program. It is my turn to welcome you on behalf of the Center for European Legal Studies to this conference, launching conference of the Master in European and International Governance. You heard already a bit on this program. The main aim of these Master of Advanced Studies is to offer a pluridisciplinary approach of governance, combining the acquisition of different skills, of academic skills, but also of professional skills. And this is favored by our cooperation with UNITAR, which builds the bridge, the link with the Geneva International. Our program allows a deep understanding of the political, economic, social, legal aspects of governance. And it's also a program which is unique. Why this program is unique? It is unique because it deals with the current challenges the international community has to face today. For example, we will hear about it, of course, human rights, migration, health and environment, peace and security. But it's not unique because of this. It is unique because it will treat and deal with these issues in a European and regional perspective, as well as in a global perspective. And this is really the uniqueness of the program we are offering here at the University of Geneva. The other, I would say, characteristic of the program is the concept of multi-level governance. Whether national, regional, or global, this concept of multi-level governance constitutes the basis and is the essence of the whole program. We designed the program for graduates, but also for professionals which want to work in an international environment. So this program is allowing participants to take over executive functions in international careers, but also in national careers with dealing with international affairs. So the idea really is to open, to give a new perspective, to discover the Geneva International, to look how this Geneva International is functioning from an academic point of view, but also from a professional point of view. Now, for today's conference, we are pleased to welcome the Director General of the UN Office here in Geneva, Mr. Michel Moller. And it is an honor for us to have you here with us today. And it would have been impossible to have a better guest speaker to launch the MEIG program. So thank you again for being with us and for having accepted to hold the speech on international governance. Thank you, Mr. Moller, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Flückiger, Professor Chapuis, Professor Cadouche, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear students. It's a pleasure to be here with you at the Université de Genève, one of the touchstones of Switzerland's vibrant intellectual life. This evening, we celebrate the launch of its Master in European Intellectual Governance, an initiative that is particularly relevant here in international Geneva. And it also is quite natural that it is born in a place like international Geneva. This joint undertaking by the United Nations Institute for Training and Research and the university brings together practitioners, academia, and researchers to instruct the next generation of diplomats, international civil servants, and scholars. It is this exchange of perspectives, born out of the close proximity between a variety of actors in international affairs, that makes the city the hub for consultations, collaboration, and action on the issues of our time. To those students in the audience tonight, let me begin with a slightly blunt question, existential question. Do you ever wonder why you're here? Why you enrolled in graduate school? Perhaps these somewhat dangerous thoughts emerge on a late night before a looming deadline, perhaps after one too many cups of coffee. But certainly, in my mind, you are here to learn and earn a degree, but these years are a unique opportunity in your lives. You are afforded time to dedicate yourselves to an issue and by plumbing its depths to reinterpret a topic. And this is true whether you're already a seasoned diplomat or whether you're starting out on your professional life. The fresh thinking that emerges from this exercise is sorely needed at this time of rapid change and fundamental stresses to global governance and to international institutions. Reading the day's headlines, it is clear that the world is entering, if it not already has entered, a period of disorder. After a prolonged drop in their numbers, the world is witnessing a worrisome rise in new conflicts of a nature different from those of the past. Today's struggles are increasingly complex civil wars with a multitude of warring parties, often divided along sectarian lines and backed by rival global and regional powers. And these realities combine to make today's conflicts increasingly intractable with severe repercussions for civilian populations. War, coupled with natural disasters and political oppression, is a driving element in another international concern, the world's refugee and humanitarian crisis. In its global humanitarian overview for 2017, my colleagues in the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs have said that 128.6 million people were in need worldwide, and that some 60 million people were forcibly displaced from their homes in the last year. Caring for those in need will require a record-breaking $22.2 billion, the sixth year in a row that OCHA has had to increase its appeal. But while the rise in humanitarian aid is linear, the need is exponential and the gap keeps growing in spite of ever larger donations. In 2016, only 52% of the global humanitarian appeal was met, and while aid agencies are finding innovative ways to deliver on their mandates under trying circumstances, it actually means that millions suffered because of that. Underpinning these conflicts and humanitarian crises are a series of mega trends that are outpacing development efforts and the ability of governments, markets, and civil society to respond. Climate change, natural disasters, population growth, rapid urbanization, and environmental degradation leave in their wakes greater competition for limited resources and services. While globalization, technological process, and global trade led to gains in standards of living and progress against poverty over the last decades, this same period also saw the withering of certain industries with devastating consequences for their communities. And while capital, goods, and increasingly services move freely, the movement of people remains restricted by borders. In this environment, few prosper economically, and many are left behind. This divide contributes to the sharp inequalities now found both between and within countries. According to recent figures, the 8 richest people in the world have more wealth than the 3.6 billion poorest combined, half of the world's population. Clearly a completely unsustainable gap between the have and the have-nots. Technological developments and the globalization of mass communications, meanwhile, make these inequalities apparent to everyone, everywhere, for the first time in human history. The 7.3 billion mobile phones that we have on the planet give us all a voice and make us all better informed. But they also facilitate the spread of misinformation through social media. Reports uncovering corruption on the part of the politically and economically powerful play an important role in holding leaders accountable, but they can also undermine public trust if justice is not served. A myopic focus on short-term political survival and the failure to exercise leadership on the part of too many politicians only serves to reinforce this public mistrust that we are seeing. In this environment, whole communities and even nations feel abandoned, ignored, and sometimes victimized. The resentment that follows weakens the bonds that binds together society and undermines confidence in public institutions and leaders at every level of governance. A November 2016 poll carried out by Ipsos Public Affairs found that 63% of respondents in 25 states said their country was heading in the wrong track. The related narrative of us against them dangerously undermines the fact that our common future is an interconnected world, in an interconnected world, demands shared responsibility. We already see these narratives at play in multilateral governance as national interests are continuously overriding the need for international solidarity. State parties have withdrawn from the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, and others are threatening to do so from the European Union, the European Court of Human Rights, and even in some cases the United Nations itself. Too many people no longer believe that these institutions serve them or their interests. With institutions coming under fire, so do the fundamental values that they represent and that they uphold, such as human rights and international commitments to refugees. Established international institutions are in part vulnerable because they have not kept up with the changing times. The United Nations was born in the aftermath of the Second World War in a world largely dominated by the state-centric principles of the Treaty of Westphalia. Its structure reflected the national bureaucratic structures of the time, and its mandate was to address the problems that extended beyond national borders. Today, nearly every issue has an international dimension, and the United Nations is just one of many actors on the global stage. These include regional organizations at various stages of integration, increasingly influential regional, municipal, and local governments, multinational firms and non-governmental organizations, and even influential individuals. All our international organizations need to reflect and engage with the changing global landscape. While acknowledging today's challenges and the shortcomings of multilateral governance, it is important not to ignore the effective work that the United Nations and its partners carry out every day to the benefit of us all. By most objective measures of human well-being, the past decades have on average been the best in history. More and more people in more and more places are enjoying better lives than ever before. The United Nations family and its partners have decisively contributed to it. This work, which is largely unappreciated by the public or unknown, often forgotten by politicians and unreported by world media, goes from the practical to the more existential. For example, road signs we all saw when we came on the way to the venue today, to medical guidelines for checks to be carried out before an operation, to international dialing codes for the phones that we all use, to standards for the food that we eat, to capacity building for developing countries to be able to trade more effectively, to the clearing of millions of landmines to help communities develop, to the millions of children that get vaccinated across the globe, to the integration of human rights into all that we do, just to name but a very few examples. Every single one of you in this room is impacted by these activities every day of your lives, and most of you and most of us are oblivious to that fact. Protecting these gains and addressing today's challenges, however, will require us to rethink the way we operate and the way we speak about them, and to be open to radical reforms and innovative partnerships. This is the case for us at the United Nations, very much so. Our new Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has announced plans to reform the United Nations approach to peace and security, to development and to its internal operations, recognizing that we cannot keep to business as usual. Central to the Secretary General's plan is a renewed focus on better and more effective prevention. Previously, prevention meant urgent diplomatic action to avert a catastrophe at the 11th hour. Today, prevention in particular means investing in institutions and programs to strengthen societies long before conflict erupts and natural disasters strike. In a world of ever-growing humanitarian expenses, prevention is both more cost-effective and more likely to yield results. Prevention, however, requires a long-term perspective and the ability to break down the silos separating peace and security from development and human rights. Because the experience of the last decades has shown us that there cannot be peace without development, no development without peace, and neither without human rights. This is a principle that has guided us and guided the member states that agreed in 2015 on far-reaching blueprint for the next 15 years known as the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Its 17 Sustainable Development Goals and 169 targets are wide-ranging and focus on everything from fighting extreme poverty and illiteracy to addressing climate change and building stronger global institutions. In so doing, they address the root causes of instability and conflict. And together with the Paris Agreement on climate change, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda on Financing for Development, and the recent agreement on cities that we had out of Quito, the 2030 Agenda represents an investment on the part of the international community in prevention. The United Nations, by virtue of its unique role in international affairs and its decades of experience and human capital, has a vital role to play in our collective efforts to reach the global goals by 2030. In many areas, the United Nations itself will continue to provide the services no other actor can or wants to deliver. But in most situations, however, the United Nations can best serve the international community by acting as a convener, a conveyor, and a facilitator. Doing so will require that the United Nations adapt its internal operations to the changing times. The Secretary General has called for significant reforms to streamline the United Nations operations and break down internal and external silos. We need to foster horizontal collaboration across issues and forge new partnerships. We also need to improve our communication and public outreach and foster a culture of openness and transparency. Finally, we have to live up to our ideals by building a culture of gender equality and sustainability. In addition to the important role of the organization in the implementation of the SDGs, governments, civil society, academia, the private sector, in short, all actors, including you and me, every single one of us, have a responsibility to contribute to the implementation of this agenda. Partnerships between the different actors are essential in this endeavor. I think the two principles that was a big sea change from other plans and objectives that we've had in the past is precisely those two things. First of all, that the objectives and the causes that they are addressing are universal. Poverty, we understand today, is not something that happens down the road in a third world country. It happens in every single country, including this one. And two, the responsibility for implementing it is really something that is incumbent on every single one of us. It's not something you leave up to your government and then you call them once a year to see how they're doing. We really, all of us, have to be part of this endeavor. In Geneva, home to many of the technical organizations that will be implementing the 2030 Agenda and other policy frameworks, we are continuously exploring new ways to enable and promote collaboration between different actors. This includes structures to facilitate exchanges between states, civil society, parliamentarians, the private sector, researchers, practitioners, think tanks, and universities. Ultimately, the coming decades will be written by those with the creativity, idealism, and dedication nurtured in universities. Each of you can play a role and should play a role in promoting change as citizens, activists, and consumers. You have to spread the knowledge of the SDGs, get involved in campaigns and activities, hold your leaders accountable, and dare to look at the world differently than we did. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this excellent speech and for defending the multilateralism and the respect of the world order. Our speaker accepted to take a few questions. You may ask them in French or in English, as you prefer, but please indicate your name and your affiliation institution, please.
There's a young man up there, the first one. Let me take 2 or 3 questions and then I'll answer them. It's probably a more effective way of conducting our conversation.
Test. Allô? Oui. Je vais parler en français.
Allez-y.
Donc, je suis Sami Ami, je suis marketing manager et poète. Je me permets une question que peut-être peu de gens vous ont déjà posée. Vous avez dit « No peace without development ». Quelqu'un a dit « No arms sellings without war ». And no drugs without cancer. J'aimerais savoir ce que vous pensez du pouvoir des lobbies, de l'armement, de la pharmacie et autres du même genre. Et ma question est tout à fait pragmatique, c'est-à-dire ma question n'est pas d'abolir ces lobbies, mais de savoir ce que raisonnablement il est possible de faire. Merci.
Oh, thank you very much for your speech. My name is Mariana. I come from Russia and I'm associated with a non-profit organization.
You're associated with who?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I didn't hear where you're from.
I'm from Russia and it's a non-profit charity organization.
Okay.
And I'm also an aspiring United Nations intern. And I have a lot of friends who intern for United Nations. So my question would be more job concerned. Do you have plans to start paying the interns? It's just very important because I grew up studying at the Model United Nations, and I share the values, share ideas, but Geneva is very expensive, and as many people would like to come here, and in turn, they just cannot afford it. So that's my question.
Sure.
Thank you.
I'll take one more before I answer this very important question. There.
Thank you. My name is Howard Hornfeld, and I'm with a group called Fusion Advocates. But I also used to work for the UN. I worked there for about 6 years until I retired a few years ago. And I was very proud of working at the UN. I thought they were doing fantastic things here in Geneva. My problem really is, why is the UN not more well known to the world? One of the major reasons is that when someone like CNN wants to interview someone, they go to somewhere else. They never come to the UN. You never see UN people who have the expertise, really deep expertise, being interviewed on the televisions. And that is essential, I think, to make the UN much more acceptable to the world's population. Do you have any comments about that? Thank you.
Sure, plenty. Okay, let's take the first question. The armaments lobby and the pharmaceutical lobby. Of course, they are incredibly powerful, and the quotes that you gave us are also very true. Of course, we wouldn't have the armament. If you, I don't know if you saw that CIPRI came out today with its annual report on armaments trade. Well, have a look at it. It's sobering information. I can't even remember the figures, but the sale of armaments worldwide has gone up by several percentage points. You know, we are in an interesting historical time where governance structures are changing dramatically. And we are moving away from a system, slowly moving away from a system where the governments are the only actors or the main actors, and many more actors and stakeholders are going to be sitting around the decision-making table, including civil society. And to me, the most obvious answer, and there are examples of how this has happened in the past, to countering the negative impact and influence of these lobbies is civil society, is a much greater coming together of the voices of people, of consumers, to counter it. A couple of examples. The sort of most classical example is the mine ban treaty, personal mines, where there was pressure to governments to abolish them and to sit down and come with a treaty that would stop their use. Not many governments were interested in, because landmines were an integral part of their defense strategies. Until the civil society globally came together. Jody Williams, a very brave woman, somehow managed to galvanize millions of people around this issue. And the result was the Ottawa Treaty, which was signed 25 years ago, where by governments, reluctantly, but which has meant that tens of thousands of people are alive today who wouldn't if we didn't have that treaty. Human rights. Today, I don't know if, well, most of you probably don't remember because you weren't born, but 25 years ago or 20 years ago, the words human rights, you couldn't utter them in the Security Council, those two words, because nobody wanted to talk about it. And human rights today is in our bloodstream. It's a completely integral element of everything we do at the international level, certainly in the UN system, and very much part of all the programming, both in development and in peace and security. All our peacekeeping operations today have a human rights component. As I said, 20 years ago, you couldn't even mention it. So, and this, to a very large extent, is because of civil society and because of the pressures of civil society. There are plenty of others. You know, a number of major multinational companies ignored their consumers at their peril. Remember, I think it was Shell, and some of the consumer companies as well are paying a lot more attention. And part of the trend that you're seeing today of business globally being much better corporate social citizens and having realized that actually behaving properly is, at the end of the day, good business, is part of the pressure of civil society and of consumers. So that's the best tool we have right now, because if you leave it up to governments, you are not going to get very far, I'm afraid, in this day and age. Interns. I would love to pay interns. And, but I don't have any money. There's several parts to the answer, in the answer to your question. Member states are not giving us money, they're doing the exact contrary. Right now we are in a, unfortunately, negative part of history in which the way our member states are dealing with our budget, the shortest way I could, and the briefest way I can explain what they're doing right now is to use two words, slash and burn. Our budgets are being cut practically every week or every month. And the last thing you can convince member states of doing right now is to pay for interns. We've tried, trust me, and we keep trying. Even at governmental level, the French government has been trying to see if we can push, and without much end. Here in Geneva, some organizations are paying their interns, are giving them stipends. Of course, ILO, by definition, has to pay their workers, and they do so. I think WHO and a number of others are doing so. We simply don't have the budget. But I want to caution, I'm cautioning some of your colleagues, as we've had these discussions in the past. And by the way, today there was a demonstration, I don't know if you were there, of your colleagues on the Place des Nations on the same subject. And not only here, but also in Vienna, in New York, and elsewhere, it was a global movement. It's becoming a global movement, and legitimately so. I just want to caution that if we were successful in convincing member states to give us the money that we need to pay for our interns, almost guaranteed the availability of places for interns would shrink. Today we have globally somewhere short of 5,000 interns across the system. That's a fair amount of money if you're going to give all 5,000 a decent income or a decent stipend to allow them to live. My second concern is my primary concern actually is not so much in the first instance to pay interns a stipend, although I would love to. My first concern is to make sure that we have a much better and greater and broader geographical distribution of availability of internships to young people from developing countries who can't afford even to come here, let alone living in a city like Switzerland. So we're trying hard on that. We're working with some of our colleagues, the ambassadors here from the African countries, to see if we can find donors. It's tough, but we're trying. In the meantime, what we're doing here is to try and alleviate, with other means, the expense of being here by helping to find cheap, if not free accommodation, by trying to convince the city of Geneva to give cheaper transportation prices on public transportation, by subsidizing the food, I think, in our cafeteria. So we're trying to do whatever we can to alleviate it. But keep it up, I mean, I've just said that the civil society is part of the answer, and it's certainly part of the answer here. If enough voices are heard and pressing hard enough on our decision makers and on our resource allocators in the different capitals, maybe we'll get somewhere. So keep it up. Now, why is the UN not known more? That's a very good question, and it's a one I asked myself the first day I started in this job. And part of the reasons why I started something called the Perception Change Project, because it was very clear to me that in this world right now, not just because of the financial pressures that we're under, but also because the world is changing so fast, and in my mind is in even greater need of the United Nations than it has been for a long, long time. It's really crucial that we explain what we do, that we explain the impact and the relevance, what all of us does, what the system does, and not just the UN, but the international system. We have lots of partners that are not part of the UN, but to work with us in the same direction and some same issues. For 70 years, our organization has been really bad at explaining what it's doing. Until about 2003, when we were hit by the bomb in Baghdad, where we lost 27 of our colleagues, most of us thought that, the UN was a given. Everybody thought it was a good thing. You didn't really need to spend too much time explaining what we were doing, because That was just a given. After 2003, and we suddenly woke up and realized that we're a target and that we needed to explain what we're doing and be much more proactive in the way that we talk about what we're doing. Unfortunately, bad habits die hard, and the necessity to completely change the way that we tell the story of what we do in a very changing communications environment, both a technological one, but also a needs-based one. As I said earlier in my comments, every 7 billion, every single one of us on this planet, all 7 billion of us, have access to information instantaneously. It's a completely different area that we live in. And also have access to the possibility of actually emitting opinions, however ill-informed they are. And it's absolutely essential that we completely change the way that we talk, that we make sure that we explain in simple ways to everybody on this planet why and what the organization is doing that affects us individually, every single one of us, in order for this to sort of, by some happy osmosis, will translate it into support that will be taken by our politicians and by our leaders. So it's been one of my major efforts here to change the way that we talk about what we're doing, and to completely change the way that, one of the things that, to answer you very specifically to your question, why there's nobody on TV and on radio to explain, is because of a very traditional approach to news dissemination in the organization, where if you were not one of the leaders, you weren't supposed to talk to the press. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Today, the News Sector Journal has turned that part upside down and is encouraging people to actually go out and talk to the press and to use social media to tell the story of what they're doing, etc. It takes a little while to change this track. He's about to change. We have a department called the Department of Public Information. He's going to, I think, pretty much dynamite that and start from scratch. And it's going to be called something like the Department for Strategic Communications or something like that, something very different that will also indicate the change of mentality and the change of objective and of view of how we're going to be talking and telling our story. It's very important. It's really crucial. I can tell you that, for example, there are two things that are the poor cousins of any operation that we do or have done over the past years. A peacekeeping operation, when it sets out, is obviously always by its planners. The budget is maximized, and two of the first things that get cut, because we never get what we ask for, is public information and training. Two incredibly important elements in any kind of forward movement as we move forward. And it's particularly important for peacekeeping operations. I've been ahead of a peacekeeping operation, and if you don't explain to the population why you're there, what the benefit to their personal lives is of a presence of 15,000 blue-helmeted troops in their country and in their society and their communities, you're going to get problems, as we are and as we see. And a lot of those problems could have been avoided if we had been better at explaining why we were in their country in the first place. So, yeah, all right. Does that kind of answer you? Sort of. You can follow up with other questions. Go ahead. All right, let's take a few more questions and then we'll come back to
you. Hello, good evening. Sorry, I'm struggling with this here.
You can keep sitting.
Can I just sit?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. My name is Ndai Jeng. I'm from the Gambia. I work with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's a pleasure to be a part of this forum. I have a question to ask, and it's on illegal migration. And coming from the Gambia, this is a very important topic for that sub-region. And I just wanted to know what is preventing the United Nations from taking or being at the forefront of resolving illegal migration, and why is the European Union just being put on the forefront? Because from where I'm coming from the West African sub-region, it is the European Union that is coordinating sub-regionally, and it is the European Union which is providing funding through the Valletta Conference and all of the Rabat process, all these initiatives, but we hardly see the UN at the forefront. And I think it being a global international organization, it should really be at a place where it will be able to make not only countries, leading countries in the world, take responsibility for situations that, like I said, situations that resulted to not only economic migration, but also political migrants. And here I'm talking about the Syrian migration crisis and economic migrants coming from West Africa. I would have thought that the United Nations would be able to make countries like the United States and all these major powers that really contributed really to the creation of the migration crisis to take greater responsibility. What do you have to say about this? Thank you.
Well, I'll say immediately from your mouth to God's ears. I'll come back to you once we've taken a couple of other questions. You are operating under some misperceptions there, but I'll come back to you. Yes?
My name is Céline Koch. I am a PhD candidate here at the Université de Genève, and I am also a PhD candidate at the Université Libre de Bruxelles in Belgium. I have a question about reform at the UN, because there was some talk about reform in general, but I never seen anything kind of real discussion about how we can reform the UN, because I've worked at the regional office in Bangkok, and what I heard and I've seen, there are sometimes overlaps between what the UNODC in Vienna is doing and what the regional office is doing. Sometimes there are also different services working on the same area. For example, human trafficking, you have the UNODC working on this, but ESCAP as well in Bangkok, but they don't talk to each other. There are also my question about multidisciplinary, because this master degree is on multidisciplinary. So I also wonder about the multidisciplinary aspect within the UN. So talk to each other and also with outsiders, in sense that I've seen some training done by the UNODC in the region, and I found it very interesting and very challenging, but I also think that there is no involvement of anyone except the officials. So it's just about this multidisciplinary aspect that I found fascinating, but I also think that it should be maybe applied for the practitioners. So in this sense, for what role for the UN, I wonder if when we look at what is going on now, what the new challenges are, what kind of reform you think about when you see all this. Thank you.
Sure. Good question. Shall we take one more? Yes. No, you come last. Yeah, Mr. Sommaruga wanted to say something.
Thank you, Cornelius Sommaruga, a man of the past. I would...
but always present.
Thank you. Director General, I would like to point to the values you have mentioned in order to work for a sustainable peace. You have spoken about development, human rights, and also have some indications of justice. I would like to add one element that I never heard in the United Nations terminologies: forgiveness. I think that there cannot be peace without forgiveness. Being understood that forgiveness is an individual movement and not necessarily a movement of the entities as states. And also that forgiveness doesn't mean to forget. One has never to forget. But I think peace needs development, justice, and forgiveness. Thank you.
Right. I'm glad you're the third one who asked, because I have to think a little bit about that. You're quite right. But, I want to see how we get to that. So, first of all, I'm not sure that you should be talking about illegal migration. What does that actually mean in your mind? One of the big problems of today is that the issue of refugees and the issue of migrants have been conflated, all put in the same pot, and it's become a big confusion for everybody. These are two different kinds of people. I'll come to it in a second. But migration as such is it illegal in some countries, of course, that don't allow their citizens to leave. But as a proposition, there's no such thing as illegal migration. Migrants are people who are looking for a better life, and that's entirely in their right. And they should be somehow, there should be an international solidarity that helps them achieve that. Now, but the underlying assumption of your question is that the flow of people on the move that we have seen the past couple of years has been pretty much mismanaged, and I tend to agree with you on that. And the other thing that you mentioned was that it's a European problem. This is one of my big frustrations, that this continues to be seen also by Europeans, but also by people outside, as a European problem. It's a global problem, and it should have been and is now increasingly being dealt with as a global problem. The third frustration is that for the past several years we've had some sort of global amnesia in operation. This is not the first time that we see flows of migrants and refugees, and it's certainly not the biggest one in history, as we keep being reminded. Even in the past century, just go back, if some of you will remember, back in the late 70s, early 80s, we had exactly the same problems, but in Southeast Asia. We had boat people coming out of Vietnam, Cambodia, and other places, people drowning at sea, pirates, countries closing their doors, and we had several hundreds of thousands of people in very dire situation. And finally, the international community got its act together after a number of years. We had a big conference that agreed on something called the Comprehensive Plan of Action, which actually put some order into how we were dealing with them. And a lot of the lessons that were learned there could have been applied to the way that we have dealt with it today. The end result was that over a number of years, we resettled 2.5 million people, all of whom live perfectly fine lives all over the planet right now. A lot of the countries, there was a very much broader sense of international solidarity in which states interviewed a lot of these people. So there was a system in place where there was a way of determining different states what kind of profiles of migrants or refugees or whatever they were to bring into their communities. Australia needed certain amounts of people and certain kinds, the United States others did it on the basis of philanthropic or whatever you want to call it. But the fact was that we resettled a lot of people. We even negotiated a deal with the Vietnamese for an orderly departure program that meant that 500,000 people were dealt with in Vietnam who qualified as refugees. And therefore didn't have to cross the seas in boats, etc. Anyway, so there were solutions to it. I think that there's a number of issues why this time around we have a problem. First of all, I have to remember that most of our leaders, and certainly European leaders, were told 2 years before it happened that this was going to happen. They were told by the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, because it was clear that things were going badly in Syria and other places. We saw what was going on in Eritrea. We saw what was going on in a number of other countries that are the major producers of outflows. They were ignored. So you have here, you have a situation where the economic and social situation in these countries was such that they were too busy with their own problems. I think that I'm not going to surprise you if I also tell you that there was a definite case of deficient leadership across the board. And again, as I said, this amnesia. International solidarity evaporated and wasn't, in spite of attempts by not only UNHCR, but also IOM and other organizations that are dealing with these issues, was not particularly successful. Of course, a number of the countries and traditional, even a lot of countries that in the past were not ready or able to take a lot of people have now since then developed. And the so-called BRICS countries, for example, could have taken a lot more. The United States could have taken a lot more. Canada did step up to the plate and when it changed government and took 25,000 in 4 months, which is quite a feat. The countries that benefited from international solidarity and opened doors in Asia, could have taken some. Certainly the countries in the immediate neighborhood of where these refugees are coming from could have done more. A lot of stuff could have been done much better. What is happening now is a realization that things were mishandled. The international community has since last year tried to get its act together and has met a couple of times and is in the process now of arranging and planning for a summit in 2018 in order to deal with the underlying problems, much broader than just the immediate problems of the actual flow of people. Because at the end of the day, when you look at the numbers of people that have gone into Europe are really not a catastrophic number. We're talking about 0.2% of the total population of Europe. When you juxtapose that to what is happening in Lebanon and Jordan, where more than a third of their populations are refugees and migrants, and where their whole social system is at the breaking point by the weight of these many hundreds of thousands of people, then what's happening in Europe is really minor. The fact is, of course, the provenance, and unfortunately it's true that we have there's a problem in the fact that many of those who are coming are Muslims, are coming from the Middle East, and we have allowed, and our leaders have allowed, a very negative narrative to take hold and has not been pushed back, that is xenophobic, that is racist, and that is frankly completely unacceptable. And also not based on fact, both in terms of refugees, but also in terms of migrants. The economic benefit of migration is proven, is clear, and is very obvious. It's just that the meek reaction by our leaders and our political systems to the narrative propagated by our media, which has been also pretty, how should I put it in a nice way? Anyway, unacceptable, has meant that we are now in a situation that is simply untenable. Germany alone will need, and is needing already, 350,000 migrants a year just to keep their economy going at the level where it is now. The United Kingdom would not be where it is economically if it wasn't for I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, and others from the subcontinent. The United States would not be the country it is if it wasn't for migrants. Australia would not be the country it is if it wasn't for migrants. Our world is made up of migration. We are all migrants. Practically everybody in this room has moved from one place to the other. So there's a serious problem in terms of the narrative that we need to deal with. And that is something that needs to be dealt with, not just in the short term, but also in the long term. So that means that we need to take a hard look at what our schools are teaching our kids, and we certainly need to take a hard look at what the media and how it's dealing with it. And there is pressures. I myself, for example, I'm working hard to convince and to reinforce a movement that has already happened called constructive news, which tells the press that when you report on a story and you report on all the negative stuff that happens in the world, go out and find somebody that has actually found a solution to that story and put it in the same piece. To re-engage people, to give hope also to people. And it's I'm happy to say that it is a trend that is picking up speed. A number of major news outlets are beginning to deal with it, to take it on. So the UN is at the forefront. It's just that the press doesn't talk much about it. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Secretary General of IOM, all are working day and night to not only give help to these people, but also to try and change the attitude and the policies of our member states. Again, I come back to what I keep saying about civil society, about the voice of the public, has to be brought in here and has to be reinforced. One of the really positive things that we have seen in Europe is that in spite of the really restrictive policies, the closing of the doors, the lifting of the bridges, by governments, and particularly some in Central Europe, have not been matched by the sentiment in the population of these countries. You go to Hungary or to Poland, you go to other countries where people are doing extraordinary things to help refugees. You go to Greece, Italy, Spain, Turkey. The public is helping and is pushing hard to do what's right. So we have to keep the fight up. That's all. And these organizations have to be given the needed help. But the UN. Let me give you a sort of an example I use often. Syria is a good example of when people criticize the UN. The criticism, very often right, certainly on the political front, that the Security Council is not doing enough. It's sitting on its hands. It's not doing its job, and we can all agree that that's a fact. However, in Syria, while the Security Council was not getting anywhere close to a political solution that would solve this problem, a whole series of organizations in the UN system has been helping millions and millions of people with food, with education, with medical assistance, and has saved thousands, if not millions of lives. Plus, UNHCR, for example, is helping north of 4 million people outside of the organization. WFP, same, World Food Programme, distributing millions of rations, both inside and outside Syria. What happens? Very short-sighted policies. The money is cut, so they can't distribute food. UNICEF and others don't have enough money to take care of all of these people in the winter. So these people do exactly what you and I would be doing if we were in the same situation. We get up and leave to somewhere where possibly there is a solution to the immediate problem. One of the interesting aspects, for example, of the reasoning for why so many people leave. And I just, a parenthesis here, it's a small percentage of all of those who have fled Syria that are leaving. Most of them are internally displaced, and many of them who have fled want to stay in the immediate vicinity because they want to go back home. All of those who left, the vast majority of them, the number one reason for leaving is not the bombs, it's not the lack of food, it's not the lack of medicine, it's the lack of education for their children. Here again, if we had a system and we had a collective solidarity that would have allowed enough resources for us to be able to take care of that in those countries, in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Turkey, then we would have much lesser reason for that. These people would have a much lesser reason to flee and to get up and leave. Reform. You haven't seen anything yet. As I've been in the UN for the past, on and off for the past 37, 38 years almost, I've been a part of, have seen and have suffered, I don't know how many reform proposals and programs. It's a process. It's a slow one. What is happening now is that the need for reform is pressing itself with a much greater intensity on the whole system, not just the UN, but all of us and the international system. We are living in a world where change is happening at a really vertiginous rate, particularly in the technological sphere. It's happening so fast with such enormously deep and broad impact that most organizations simply don't have the ability to adapt fast enough, and certainly most of us as individuals either. But it's happening, and we have to find ways of adapting. The only way that the system is going to be able to remain relevant and actually help member states get to where they have all agreed that they want to go through all these policy frameworks I mentioned earlier is if we change completely the way that we work. The easiest way to describe what needs to happen is the following. For the past 70 years, we have rewarded our staff for hoarding information and for working in their silos. All of a sudden, out of the blue, we are going to have to tell them, we are telling them now, that they are now going to be rewarded if they share information, if they work across issues, across organizations, across silos, across generations, and by the way, they're going to be held accountable for it as well. Accountability is a word that simply doesn't exist in our vocabulary, really, and it's going to have to be injected in a very pragmatic and operational way. The only way this is going to happen, and first of all, it has to happen quickly. If there's one thing that's for sure, is that a bureaucrat is a person that does not like change. It's as simple as that. It doesn't matter what bureaucracy you're in, whether it's a national or it's an international one. It's just endemic. It's part of the DNA of a bureaucrat. We don't like change. I remember some years back, about 20, 25 years ago, we realized in the UN Secretariat that things were changing and we needed to change as well. So we did a survey. It's called the Briggs-Myers survey. Some of you may know it. And it's a psychological profiling that tells you which box you're in, whether in your box you are somebody who's imaginative or you like you're outside, you'd like to be outside the normal structures, etc. And it turned out that 85% of us, 85%, were in the little box that says, I don't like change, go away, leave me alone. So we had to change the way we recruited. We had to change quite a lot of things. Some of it has been successful, moderately. But anyway, we're now in a situation where we need to change completely the way we work. Thank God we have received now, by some miracle or fluke, a very strong Secretary General. And it will take all his strength, but it will take his strength not on his own. He has to create new strategic partnerships with the member states because he won't be able to do it alone. It has to be something that happens together. But when I say that, it's also easier said than done. You have to remember that the UN system was created by states, for states. We are a mirror image, structurally speaking, of every single member state, every single capital. Silos, you have ministries of defense, of health, of development, etc., that don't talk very much to each other, and they also need to change. So this fundamental sort of existential change has to happen both within our own system and also in the capitals. And it's beginning to happen. People are getting it. People understand that if we're going to reach these goals, the global roadmap that we have suddenly been given against every expectation, we're going to have to do that change. It's happening certainly organically and much easier in this town, because this is the operational hub of the international system. This is where all the technical agencies are. And it's a lot easier to get to agreement in a technical setting than it is in a diplomatic or political setting. So we are working quite hard to foster that and to push it, because we're in a hurry. It's no good saying that this is going to happen organically, because all of us will be dead and gone by the time it happens. I'll give you a simple example: gender parity, that we are working hard on here. If we continue as we're doing now, we will reach gender parity in about 95 years in our organizations. That doesn't make any sense. It certainly doesn't make any sense in a world where we need every single able-bodied man and woman to do what we need to do and to put our planet back to where it needs to be for our children. So we're speeding it up, and we're having some success here. I'm pushing it very hard in my own within my own responsibilities. But the fact is that it needs every hand on deck. And again, it needs push from civil society. It's not something that you can just sit back and bemoan that it's not happening. Everybody has a responsibility to push us in that direction, both the politicians, ourselves, and yourselves. And by the way, you're the ones who are going to inherit these organizations, so you better make sure that they work. Because if we don't make this change and we don't do it fast, we're going to become completely irrelevant, and we will, many of these organizations will close their doors. And we're going to have to reinvent them. Not an easy thing and an easy task in today's world. You had a follow-up question.
Yes, I do. It's not really a question. It's further to what I was saying before. And that is, I think the communications that the new Secretary General is going to create should not be called the Office of Strategic Communications.
I made that up.
Well, it may be, but I don't know whether they're thinking of that or not, but it should be much more tactical in the first case. But even more important than that, I think we have to get people like major stars, Hollywood stars, to talk about the United Nations. We can get Leonardo DiCaprio, for example, who will talk about energy. Or we get Roger Federer to talk about something or other. They should be spokesmen for the United Nations. Yeah. They can get their act onto screen easily. And I think we could really have a team of such people who become experts in their chosen areas. As I say, Leonardo DiCaprio has become an energy expert. And others can do the same sort of thing and speak on behalf of the United Nations. They don't need to be paid. They will probably pay their own way anyway, so it won't cost us anything. And there's an awful lot of good stuff that the UN does. I know, as I say, I worked there for 6 years. I was very proud of what we did. But nobody knows what I did, and nobody really would care, in my case, in any case, because what I was doing was something very special. But in any case, there's a lot of very good stuff going on here, and nobody knows about that. And we should get people like Roger Federer, Stan Wawrinka, all these other people who can get themselves onto the screens. And let's do it.
Well, I'm sorry to tell you that you're a little bit behind the curve on this one, because we actually do have all these people working for us. Next week, we have Angelina Jolie coming, for example, to speak. So we have a whole host of them. The fact that you haven't heard of them is a problem, because you ought to have. And they're obviously not doing as good a job as they ought to, but the fact is that we do, and we're going to do that more and more. I beg your pardon? They need to be more encouraged. Yes, I know. Well, that's where the problem lies. It's one of the problems, that a lot of the major outlets are not picking up on this, because their sort of central guiding principle is one that is called, when it bleeds, it leads. And when they only report on some of the catastrophes that are happening and not on the good solutions that we're finding on some of these things. So we're pushing very hard to change that. And we'll get there. But I take your point completely. And by the way, I also dispute the fact that I don't know what you did, but by definition and by principle, what you did is not unimportant. And we each one of us who works in these organizations have a responsibility to talk about it.
I never said it was unimportant.
But you just said that nobody wanted to hear about it, or that it was. But the whole trick here is to change the narrative in such a way that we explain even the most arcane things that each one of us does in the system, and some of it is not that easy to explain, in words that are understandable. My biggest objective, and that I set out to when I started, was that as soon as possible, when I walk down the street and the first person I meet, I ask them, what does the UN mean in your life, in your personal life? I would actually get an answer if we were successful in doing what we're supposed to do. Right now, we just get a blank stare and people run away because they think you're crazy. but seriously, just to put it in very simple terms. Any more questions? Up there. No, there are two. Hang on a second. Before you, there's a lady behind you. Then your turn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moller. My name is Sukai from Jackson. I'm an inspector of the Joint Inspection Unit right here in Geneva.
Okay.
I have one question, actually, and it relates to, and thank you very much. I think that dialogue, I like the point that you made. You made lots of excellent points, but I particularly like the point about staff members actually speaking for the UN. And there's a lot of highly committed staff, and being able to speak about the UN, I think, becomes quite important. It would complement having stars actually coming to talk about the UN when the staff themselves actually are not allowed to. So I really appreciated that point. And the point I want to make is in this context of global governance, you've highlighted the role that's played by a large number of other global actors. I think that's very important. You mentioned that in that particular context, the UN's comparative advantage lies in its being a convener, coordinator, facilitator. My question is, could you speak a little bit more about what that means? Mm-hmm. Those types of activities are generally regarded as soft assistance.
As what?
Soft assistance. Mm. It's not the heartbreaks, it's not. The question that's raised with that is, what would it do to the leadership role of the UN in its context where, as you said, fast change, all these challenges that we have. And secondly, in a context where donors ask for results, and very specific ones, which would be quite difficult for the UN to define when it moves into these particular areas. So perhaps you could highlight what that really means in terms of moving forward, and this being a comparative advantage of the United Nations. Mm-hmm. I thank you.
Sure. The young man there.
I just wanted to say, I believe Mr. Samaruga had a very good point, and
sorry, I didn't get to that. Yes, thank you. Thank you. No, absolutely. Okay, let me take that and then come to the leadership issue. Sorry, Mr. Somaruga, it wasn't on purpose. Of course, you're right. And I think the issue of forgiveness is inherent in the very values that the UN was built on and is part of. It's maybe not, I think maybe the fact that we don't speak about it is a little bit part of that auto-censure that we apply, unfortunately, across the board and have over the years, because forgiveness is not really part of the natural part of the peace and security infrastructure and the sort of more martial politicians that we have to deal with. I think that when you look at the very basic raison d'être and the reason why the UN was created, and to put it in very simple terms, it was created to be the neutral table around which everybody can sit and discuss, small and big, rich and poor, West, brown, white, whatever. And that inherent in that sort of existential reason for it being and for it having been so successful. A big part of that is the ability to forgive, and as a very fundamental and central element in the ability of us fostering these discussions between people who, from the outset, don't agree with each other. And that's one of the elements that we have to strengthen, I think. And when I talk, it brings me to the question of my colleague from the JIU, the facilitating, the convening power, the facilitating power. That's an inherent aspect of it. I think you're probably right that we have to highlight it more. I think that if there's one place, for example, where we need a very big doses of forgiveness is in our current efforts to get to grips with the Syrian problem, to put it mildly. I can tell you that the issue of forgiveness is nowhere to be seen when you talk to the different parts of the protagonists. I just came this weekend from the Munich Security Conference, where they discussed Syria at length. All very smart people talking at length about, but when you put the Russians and the Syrians and the opposition and the government and the Americans and everybody else on a podium, and they all had something to say, the word forgiveness didn't appear at all. So I agree with you that it's something that we need to, and I'm going to reflect on it, how we do that in a way that actually, how do you operationalize that in a way that actually strengthens the hand of mediators and of peacemakers. Let me sort of take a roundabout way to answer your question. First of all, I said it earlier, but let me just remind you again that the human race has never been as well off as it is today. We live longer, we live better, we're healthier, we're better educated, we do all sorts of things that our forefathers never did or were able to do. And this is something that has happened pretty much over the last 70 years, and a big reason for why we are where we are today, and where that well-being is as pronounced as it has ever been, and why there are less people dying in wars, in spite of what the headlines say of papers. But the fact is that statistically we're a lot less. You're more likely to die in a car accident than you are being shot by somebody in a war. A big part of that is this international system that was built after the Second World War, and a big part of that is the UN, but it's not just the UN. But nevertheless, this structure has meant that somehow we have figured out a way as human beings to improve our well-being and the way that we live. This puts in relief what we stand to lose if we don't get the governance structure right and the governance. We are in a strange, as I said, between two chairs right now, moving from one governance system to another one, the old one still being there in an asymmetric way, the new one not being defined yet and not being legitimized yet. And when you are in a vacuum like that, nonsense happens, and this is exactly what we're seeing right now. In this particular moment in history, I believe that the world has never needed the UN as much as it does today. We have an extraordinary amount of expertise, experience, human capital that could be used and should be used a lot better, and will. So when I said that convener, facilitator, and all this doesn't put aside the hard assistance that we're doing. In a lot of countries, we are going to keep helping. I think I said it as well. We are going to help do the well digging and the educational programs and the health programs and everything else, the refugee assistance, the vaccinations of kids, and all of this stuff. But its political role, if you want, and its leadership role has to shift a little bit, and you have to responsibilize and help the governing structures, whatever they're going to be, to take much greater responsibility for what they're doing, and not just sit back, as many have over the past 70 years, and just expected assistance in one form or the other without really getting involved. It has been our fault as well. I've served in many different places. I served in Haiti, for example, and one of my biggest frustrations there was that we, as a system as a whole, couldn't get our act together to actually teach and reteach or restructure the society itself in terms of health, in terms of education, in terms of justice systems, even in terms of political systems, to such an extent that the responsibility for running their own affairs could be taken over by them. Because we were fragmented, because the World Bank said one thing, UNICEF said another, UNDP a third, and then the US government came in with a fourth, so it was a big salad that nobody really wanted to eat, and really ineffective. A lot of money and a lot of effort has been wasted over all these years. But, our intellectual understanding of the complexity and the interrelatedness of the problems today is much more sophisticated than it's ever been. The structures that we have in order to implement also, we therefore also know that the solutions are what the solutions are. Unfortunately, our structures didn't follow suit and haven't followed suit. So we have a structure that was created 70 years ago, and by and large is pretty much the same, both at political level, but also in the structural and operational level, with the silos, with the different organizations, with their different budgets, with their little flags, everybody staying and being proud of what they do, but not wanting to talk to anybody else. That is changing now. I can tell you specifically in this city, the leadership of all of the specialized agencies have gotten the message that business as usual simply isn't viable anymore. And what is interesting now is that also at the staff level, what I'm seeing is spontaneous getting together of senior staff across organizations. There's one grouping that is made up of staff from 30 different organizations that gets together socially or privately, if you want, to sit and discuss and try and figure out ways of leveraging each other's programs to actually get to where we need to go and implement these sustainable development goals in a much better way. And that needs to be encouraged and pushed and helped. But it also needs to be helped and accepted and pushed and funded by member states. And as I said earlier, we're going to need to do some serious reform, internal reforms. That reform is not going to happen unless member states, and we have some representatives here, so take note. Unless they severely roll back the micromanagement that the system has been subjected to over the past several decades. That is, it has reached a stage now that is so debilitating to any kind of implementation of these programs, and a roll-up of smart, targeted financing of the different activities in a way that actually will do the kind of preventive action that we were talking about before, and that will help us get to where we need to go, and will just not be a sort of small interventions. One of the big problems we have, unfortunately, is a very structural one, which is something that also needs to be addressed, but it's part of is the fact that our political systems are short-term. Politicians work in a time frame that is 3 years, in some cases 4 or 5, but not more than that. The solutions that we're looking at for all the big problems that are facing us are long-term. We're not going to lick climate change or migration issues, and I'll come back to that in a moment, or any of the other big-ticket items that are facing us in 3 years. It will need investment, it will need decisions where you're not going to see results 10, 15 years down the road. So you have a system where politicians are not going to take decisions or commit funding for stuff that's not going to happen while they're still in power. And we have a big problem with that. One of the ways of solving that problem is to use the UN system in a better way. because that's a long-term approach to issues where you have, but in order to do that as well, and this is one of the sort of chicken and eggs issues, one of the big fundamental problems that we have today is a trust deficit. Nobody trusts anybody anymore. We can talk about why that is. There are plenty of reasons of it, particularly the inequality the growing inequality we're seeing in the world. But the fact is that trust is something that you earn. We as an organization we're only going to get the trust back in our system if we do the reforms that we need to do, and if we prove on very practical terms on the ground that what we do actually has an impact in the lives of every one of us. Otherwise, that trust is not going to come back. There are many other issues in terms of getting the trust. I'll speak very briefly to one of them, which is the Security Council, which none of you have asked about. But clearly, in the public's mind, when you talk about the UN, one of the first things that comes to mind is the fact that the Security Council is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. It's not stopping the wars. It's supposed to be the guarantor of the peace and security of every one of us on this planet. It's not doing its job. And it's not doing its job because of many reasons, but one of them is that it's an outdated structure that is neither representative of the geopolitical realities of today. It is representative of a reality that is 50 to 70 years old. It's not representative, it doesn't respond to that more sophisticated understanding of what the root causes of the problems that it's dealing with are. So it doesn't really deal with the economic, social, and cultural aspects of a problem. It just looks at the problems through a security lens. And it's not representative in terms of who sits on the council. Frankly, the membership of the council today doesn't make any sense in terms of what the world looks like. And so all of this has to change, and it's a hard thing to do. As I said, it's an organization that was created by states for states. And what you're basically telling states is that they should who are already on the defensive and losing power because there are all the other actors around that are pressing on and want a seat at the table. And you're telling these states that they actually have to give up even more power than they're already given now. So it's a counterintuitive demand. Reality has a way of imposing itself sooner rather than later on everybody, and it will impose itself on our system as well, because as I said earlier, if we don't get our act together, we will close. And it would be a great pity because it will be a lot harder to reinvent, which it will have to be done from scratch in today's world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So thank you very much again for this very rich exchange with the audience and for being with us tonight for this launching conference of the MEIG program. So it was very nice to have you all here. And I just want to add one small thing. On behalf of the university, I would like to invite you, all of you here, to have a drink outside this room, on behalf of our rector.